Bad news for Justin Trudeau. A Canadian federal judge has ruled that Trudeau's controversial use of the Emergencies Act during the 2022 Freedom Convoy trucker protests in Canada was, quote, unreasonable and unjustified. Trudeau used the act to seize the bank accounts of protesters and ban public assembly in certain areas, amongst other widespread anti-protest policies. Now, as a reminder, the Freedom Convoy protests were pushed back against the government's COVID-19 vaccine mandates and lasted several weeks during the early months of 2022.
In response, Trudeau's government vowed to appeal the decision, saying they believed that invoking the Emergencies Act was, quote, right and necessary at the time. Here's Trudeau's Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, on that.
It was a hard decision to take. We took it very seriously after a lot of hard work, after a lot of careful deliberation. We were convinced at the time, I was convinced at the time, it was the right thing to do. It was the necessary thing to do. I remain, and we remain, convinced of that.
But not everyone shared Freeland's support for the use of the Emergencies Act. Tucker Carlson had this to say.
Thank you for your call. You have reached the media line. For all urgent requests, please send your request by email. Merci pour votre appel. Vous avez atteint la ligne médiatique. Merci beaucoup.
Yes, hi. I couldn't understand the French part, but it's Tucker Carlson calling from the United States. And I'd be grateful if you pass a message on to the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. We are coming to liberate Canada. We are coming to liberate Canada. And we'll be there soon. Merci.
So Trudeau appealing to try to keep the right to use this Emergency Act in the future. Very concerning, I think, from a civil liberties perspective. Obviously, this was a massive crackdown on protesting, on free speech, on the banking aspect is something that we both found very troubling. Mm-hmm. That you could be unbanked, unpersoned financially in that way. I also support their cause. They were organizing against having to be vaccinated. Truckers being, even if you're buying into let's say I don't, but let's say you buy into the need for vaccine mandates under some circumstances. This was a group of employees that are about as remote as possible, that drive big trucks, aren't going into a lot of offices, aren't interacting with a lot of people. Remember, that was the argument for vaccine mandates at the time, to slow the spread, and if you're interacting with a lot of other people. Now, of course, there's also a lot of reason, I think, to doubt vaccine mandates in those cases as well, but truckers were an especially sympathetic group to have an exception from that, and were subject to the Emergencies Act being deployed.
Yeah, it's a horrible abridgment of civil liberties. The attack on people's means of kind of financial maneuvering was particularly galling, as was the rhetoric around it. That it now is making all of these Trudeau and the rest of the politicians who are aligned with him really have egg on their face, because they've since declared that COVID is over, COVID's not an emergency, everybody's moving on, when numerically things are not very different from where they were a year ago, when a lot of this was, or a year and a half or so ago, when a lot of this was happening. So they kind of have to keep appealing this, because otherwise it really exposes the extent to which they weren't really tailoring their policy response to what was geared to have an actual political outcome. Moreover, if you genuinely did believe that it was necessary to intervene for an individual to avoid being hospitalized because they didn't want to get the bad effects of COVID and they should be vaccinated, you could still be providing positive incentives for people to do those kinds of things. All of that has completely gone out the window, at least in the United States. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, Canada has a much more robust healthcare system than we do. But Joe Biden has ended all of the post-pandemic policies, not wanted to offer anybody carrots, much less sticks, to incentivize them to get vaccinated. And so in hindsight, all of these policies that we're going to say we're going to basically disable you to have money and pay your rent and live your life because you didn't get the vaccine seem particularly draconian. It's like you didn't even believe in it.
Yeah. Former Congressman Justin Amash, who's libertarian, I saw said on Twitter that he He wants legislation on the U.S. side to sunset national emergency. That it's just way too easy for government to declare a national emergency and have it go on forever. He says that when he was in the House, he introduced the National Emergencies Reform Act, which would automatically sunset emergencies after a period of 60 days unless they're reauthorized by Congress. Because that's another thing. We don't just want the president, and if you're a Democrat, you can fear this if it was Donald Trump too. It's not a partisan thing. Just declaring national emergencies, and obviously this happened in Canada, but forcing people to either get vaccinated or forcing services like PayPal or whatever else to unbank it. Like, that's all very concerning. At the bare minimum, we want Congress, the more supposedly and allegedly accountable branch, to have to vote on things, to have to craft new legislation to deal with problems as they come up, rather than just have the president, whoever it is, declare it off the top of his head.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about as Biden has, without the consent of Congress, started bombing foreign countries. It's also worth thinking about in the context of the Cop City protesters who were charged under a RICO statute. I think 4 or 5 dozen protesters, some of whom were charged with things like participating in a bail fund to raise money for someone who had been charged and imprisoned for protesting this Cop City Center. People were charged who had been passing out flyers, a clear demonstration of First Amendment rights. And it also is relevant when you think about what's happening on college campuses right now, where you have billionaires in league with a small minority of professors on campus and others who are making certain organizations illegal and then not even seemingly following up with crimes against those students because they say the justification is that the group was not supposed to be protesting in the first instance. And I'm alluding, obviously, to the case we just had at Columbia, where 2 former IDF members who were students used a skunk, a kind of a chemical weapon that has been developed and used by the IDF, on their former students, on their fellow students in the midst of a peaceful protest. You have a complete disinterest in that by the administration until reporting by The Intercept.
Yeah,
really,
they have taken action now, as they should.
After reporting by The Intercept, made it an issue that wasn't going to go away. And over and over and over again, you see this kind of effort to silence voices on college campuses when their politics are out of step with the mainstream establishment view. So there's a lot of reasons to take this as a warning call.
Yeah, I think specifically the unauthorized war part is very similar to this, from the national emergency kind of endless justification for things. Actually, I see Justin Amash also calling for, at the bare minimum, a congressional vote to authorize or not authorize it, but the bottom line being Congress has to decide whether, responding to attacks is one thing, but given the increasing involvements, for instance, in the Red Sea, it is at a point where, again, Congress, not the president, just deciding things. The president is supposed to carry out the policies that are approved by our elected representatives. And it's a shame that Congress has decided over time to delegate so much of its authority to the executive and then just, be celebrity entertainers or something.
Yeah, I do think specifically I'm concerned about the abridgment of people's fundamental rights and privileges, their kind of Bill of Rights style right. So the Trudeau, the war powers are significant, but the Trudeau stuff that really infringes on people's ability to freely associate with each other, to assemble the way they like, to drive a truck and park it in a noisy downtown area and block traffic if they want. I know a lot of conservatives have been really antagonistic to people who do that in defense of Gaza and for climate reasons and the like. They seem to support it when it was about truckers protesting, and I think you should keep in mind that you shouldn't criticize a mechanism of protest when you really are upset about the underlying protest. If you don't like climate stuff, if you don't care about Gaza, that's fine. But recognize that you wanted these people to be able to use their right to protest when they were truckers protesting COVID regulations. And some of us on the left consistently defended them and their right to do that, because when you start infringing on people's rights to express yourself and to have speech in those ways, it always trickles down to your side eventually.
Well, we will continue to follow any developments on that front, and we'll have more Rising right after this.